What's up, guys? So this is side deck tier list, and this is pre-YCS London. So I think the meta is defined enough that I can redo this and have it a bit more accurate. And start off with, we're going to say Lancia. Lancia is A tier. So Lancia hasn't been amazing. Well, I didn't think it was amazing at first because it was a bit slow, essentially. It only really stopped Kashtira on their turn, which is okay, but if they have a good enough hand, they can still put up interruptions. But I think Lancia is getting better just because of the prevalence of cards like Evenly. One of the things that I'm really liking with Lancia, if you're playing something like Trap Tricks, this is actually a really good card to even main deck, as it means that you just do your whole board, and then when they go to battle phase to try and evenly, or even in draw phase to try and play around things like Prosperity, you drop Lancia and you turn off their whole turn. So that gives it a lot of utility as a result. Cypher's banned, my bad for it being there. Dark Realer, unfortunately, is going to be probably B tier or lower. The problem with Dark Realer is while Sprite is a good deck, that's right now the only deck that Dark Realer is like very, very good against. Most other decks, Dark Realer is just a bit too slow, and so unfortunately, I don't think it's worth playing. You can side deck it, and if you really, really need it, and like Sprite is your worst matchup, and you think there's going to be loads of them, but other than that, I wouldn't play it. DD Crow is C tier. The card itself is not terrible. It's just that with Kashtira being in the format, again, it's a thing where there's not enough nonsense in the graveyard that DD Crow actually stops. Lightning Storm is A tier. In fact, I'm willing to even say actually it's S tier in that you probably should be side decking Lightning Storm just because of the amount of back row decks in the format, and even though all of them have destruction protection, they have it because Lightning Storm exists. So having the combo of Lightning Storm and Evenly against a deck like Labyrinth is so difficult to deal with for them. So yeah, I really do think it's a great card. Denko, this is probably the first format that I would actually say Denko is an A tier hand trap, and that's just because again, with Trap Tricks in the format, with Labyrinth in the format, there is enough back row decks that if you can play Denko, it is a very, very good side deck card that will just shut out those decks, and yeah, they can't play against you. So yeah, really like that card. Pankrotop CTR, just not consistent enough. Cosmic Cyclone, I'm actually going to put down to B, because while Cosmic Cyclone is very good, my biggest issue with it is it only deals with one card. And the big problem we'll have with trap decks now is that they're very fast. Trap decks aren't, the trap decks in the format, again, which are Labyrinth and Trap Tricks for the most part, they don't just put one card down a turn. They can easily put down 2 or 3 cards in a turn in their back row, which means Cosmic Cyclone, while great, you need to be able to destroy multiple cards. Good to side deck. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying it's not as good as it used to be. Anti-Spell, in my opinion, is definitely an S tier hand trap. The thing about Anti-Spell that makes it so unfair is that there are a lot of power spells in the format. And so you have an anti-spell, and if you've made a board and then you drop an anti-spell on top of that, oh my gosh, your opponent's going to struggle to play. Yeah, really, really good going first. Just FTK some matchups. Now, you do have to be careful. Some matchups, like Kashtira, for example, have in-archetype ways to very easily out it. Like, Kashtira will just attack into you and use Fenrir to banish it. But other than that, Anti-Spell is very, very good. Pointer is always going to be an 80 hand trap while it's in the game. It's just a good hand trap. Look at your opponent's hand. There's hard to beat that. Alpha is, I'm even going to say Alpha is a D tier hand trap. The problem with Alpha essentially comes down to the fact that even though going second is good this format, it's a bit slow. So you put Alpha on the board. If they have an interruption, they're just going to remove him from the board, and then now you've just wasted a card for no reason. Ally of Justice is irrelevant right now. Kaijus, I'm going to say, are high A tier, if not S tier. I'm almost tempted to put them in S tier, but it's weird. I'm going to put them in A tier in that I almost feel like you should just main deck Kaijus if you can. They're really, really good because against pretty much every deck, they're doing something annoying that has like one monster that you just want that is kind of difficult to out. So Kashtira are doing this whole nonsense with a Rise Heart, and it's usually backed up by a Lance. You've got Trap Tricks, which they've got their Serra, which is giving them huge advantage. Branded often will have a Mirror Jade or a Dragoon. Sprite will have a Sprint, which facilitates other interruptions, will have Toad. So Kaijus just end up being really, really good. And another great thing about Kaijus is that there's huge versatility. So if you're archetype locked, you've got Kumongus if you're playing Trap Tricks. If you're locked into an attribute, you can play the Dark or you can play the Light Kaiju. I mean, there's just so many different things you can do with it. So Kaijus are really, really good. Definitely think you should play them. Ice Dragon's Prison is not relevant right now. Phantasme, unfortunately, I'm even going to put in D tier. Phantasme hasn't been relevant for a minute. There's not enough link decks. White Howling is another one I don't think is relevant at the moment. Blizzard, on the other hand, I actually think Blizzard is better than it seems. And that's because, again, we're in a format with a lot of power spells. And when there's a lot of power spells, you want a card like Blizzard, because Blizzard has the ability to kind of trade very uniquely with your opponent. Even if you look at matchups like the Runic matchup, you can target their field spell, for example, instead. And now, instead of destroying it, you've just negated it so they can't interact with you. So I actually think Blizzard is very, very good. The only disadvantage, again, is that it depends on your opponent playing certain cards, which does kind of lower its consistency a bit. Contact C, I'm going to say that's high B tier, if not A tier. It's a good hand trap. The problem with Contact C, I usually find, is that so many people are prepared for it. It's almost like it's such a good card that your opponent prepares for it, and if your opponent prepares for it, it's terrible. Because if your opponent prepares for it, it's not like tier where you activate in the middle of their combo and you essentially shut off a bunch of their fusions at once. No, it's like you summon it after the Kashtira player summons one card, and then they just make was it Dagger or Donna for Hire, or they just make Arthur the Earth Charmer. And now your Contact C hasn't done anything other than giving them advantage, which is a bit of a shame. Warning Point never became relevant, unfortunately, and Get Out never became relevant. Necro Valley is unfortunately not relevant this format as well because, well, while Necro Valley is a good card, there's just not enough Graveyard decks in the format. Shared Ride I'm going to put at the bottom of C tier. There are decks that do a lot of searching, but it's just so difficult to like rely on that to like facilitate your plays, in my opinion. Like, you're going to be relying on way too much kind of RNG if you're looking for Shared Ride, even though there are decks that draw a lot. But I would say, for example, there are certain decks like Drytron and Dark World that this is amazing against. But I'd rather just play Draw instead of Shared Ride, to be honest. Crossart Designator is an S tier hand trap in my opinion. Actually, no, I'll put it high A tier, not S tier. Because I will say Crossart Designator is A tier for certain decks. For decks like Branded, for example, or decks like Kashtira, this is so incredible because you're going to destroy mirror matchups, and it has the ability to actually facilitate your play. So in both Branded and Kashtira, you can cross out a card that you want, like a Gimmick Puppet or a Kashtira monster, and then summon it with Birth or summon it with Expulsion, which is another use of cross out, which is so insane. Now, not every deck needs cross out, which is kind of where it's got a little bit of a weakness, but I definitely think cross out is a very, very good card at the moment, and people are sleeping on it a little. Rivalry, I'm going to say, is probably high B tier. It's probably one of the best floodgates this format. Rivalry and Gozen, like they're just very good because there's a lot of decks that are kind of switching between attributes or switching between types. So Rivalry ends up being very good. Then we've got Soul Drain and Mind Drain. So I think, if I'm not mistaken, it depends, but I think Soul Drain is the hand one. Maybe I'm correct. Either way, somewhere in C tier. Not terrible, not amazing. I don't think it's anything particularly special. I do think Skill Drain, on the other hand, is a very good floodgate as well, this format, just because it answers Kashtira very, very well. So if you can play under Skill Drain, great card. Token Collector is not very relevant. Even with the resurgence of Brave decks, I just don't think it's that relevant of a card, and I don't think you should be playing it. Summon Limit, if your deck can play it, it's good, but nothing special. DDG, it's not a bad card, but I'm going to put it in D because Kashtira exists, so play Kashtira if you really feel the need to put DDD in your deck. Twin Twisters is somewhere in A tier, a good card again. It's just generic. Actually, I'll put in B tier because it's a little bit worse because of the discard, but just generically a good back row removal, and you do need it this format. Super Poly, in my opinion, is high A tier as well. One of the nice things about Super Poly is that it does answer quite a few decks this format. Branded is in the format, and so you can like wipe their whole board, which is absolutely unfair. Definitely a good card. Eradicate is S tier. Again, a lot of power spells in the format. If you can play Eradicate, you should. If you can't, find a way to play it and play it. And obviously we have decks like Labyrinth, which are setting it from the deck, and Virtual World. I found out Virtual World can do that as well. So yeah, Eradicate, a very, very unfair card. Solemn's just a bit too slow. Droll is another S tier hand trap in my opinion. I think Droll is really, really good because what you will actually see is that all of the top decks do search a lot. It just depends on their hand sometimes. So Kashtira, for example, if they start with Field Spell, Droll is insane. Sprite, if they start with blue, Droll is insane. The problem is sometimes those two top decks, and it's probably those two are the biggest exceptions, and sometimes Random as well, because if they get to state with Aluba, it's terrible. The three top decks, sometimes Droll doesn't matter too much, but when it does matter, it shuts down a turn, and I find that Droll is probably one of the best hand traps on the crackback. Another great thing about Droll is it helps you get punished less by thrust, because if you Droll, they have to set the card, which means now they've got a card, but they're not going to use it this turn, which means you're probably going to get another turn. Evenly is SSS. This, if there was a tier 0 hand trap, this would be it, or tier 0, sorry, side deck card, this would be it. Evenly is so incredibly amazing right now. You should actually be main decking it. It's just every single deck folds to it. Very, very good card. You're never going to regret having it in your main deck. Talents is high A tier, if not S tier. What I'd say about, so I moved D-Bear by accident. What I'd say about Talents is that it's not that it's bad or anything. It's just that nowadays it tends to make no sense to not just play 3 thrust instead of playing 3 talents. But yeah, you play 3 thrust and 1 talents, for example, or 2 thrust and 1 talents, makes more sense, but it's still a very, very good card. Droplets, unfortunately, with the prevalence of Kashtira, it makes the card a lot worse. If it wasn't so dead in the Kashtira matchup, I would actually think Droplets would be a bit higher, because quick plays are good, and Droplets interaction is very strong, but Kashtira being in the format means it will be dead in your worst matchups, where you probably need it the most. D-Barrier is S tier. This is another card definitely you should be looking at for your side deck at the moment. It's just unfair, and with Branded in the format, you need it. Duster, yeah, it's a good back row removal, nothing bad. Duster is the same as Lightning Storm, but just so back row, it's great. Silent Graveyard, it's not relevant at the moment. Imperial Order banned. Lava Golem is another S tier side deck card at the moment. And one of the great things about Lava Golem is, even though Kashtira, for example, only end on one monster, that most other decks are going to be end on more than one monster, and Kashtira sometimes will end on more than one monster. So if you can play it, play it. And in certain decks like Mathmech, where you can search it because of Small World, even better, because then you just always have on demand remove 2 cards, and it burns your opponent, which is kind of cool as well. So yeah, definitely a very good card. Gamma, unfortunately, is not as good as it used to be, and it's because I keep moving the wrong card. Gamma is not as good as it used to be, just because it destroys the monster, which isn't amazing. You don't want your opponent to have an empty board, especially in this format with Kashtira, with evenly matched. I want my opponent to have something on the board, just not something not useful, which is a bit of a problem. Quaking Mirror Force is never going to be good. I don't know why I have that. Mistaken Arrest is okay, but there's no scenario I would ever play this over Droll. Again, it's like, just play Droll instead. Even though this sort of does something straight away, I think Droll is just flat out better. Skullmeister, not relevant at the moment, you don't need to play it. Judgment, I would say, is an A tier hand trap, just because there's so many hard side deck cards to deal with. But I think Anti-Spell is better, because Judgment only deals with 1 card. Your opponent might have 2 or 3 power spells or power cards in their hand, and I'd much rather have Anti-Spell, unfortunately. I just think it's better. And on that note as well, I would also say that it's not here, but Imperial Iron Wall, I would play that as well. I think that would probably be somewhere in the A tier as well. I think that's actually a very good side deck card at the moment, but I don't have it in this list. Spear Mode is a worse Lava Golem. I don't think Spear Mode is bad. However, it's more likely to be dead than Lava Golem. But if you can play Lava Golem, play Spear Mode. Goes into the same thing. All the Forbidden cards are pretty good, but I'd say Lance is probably the best. I'm showing Chalice right now, but Lance would probably be somewhere in A tier. Chalice, let's say bottom of B tier. Just a good generic card. Red Reboot is banned. Shifter is bad in my opinion. I don't think Shifter is worth playing. I think there's not enough decks that care about it, and the few decks that do care about it now have consistent answers to it. So when you're talking about decks like Drytron, they're going to make Fucko and pass. When you're talking about Dark World, they can make Baguska and pass, and actually they can play through Shifter a little bit. It's not the instant win it was in tier format, and so I don't think Shifter is worth. Nibiru is S tier. I think if it's not in your main deck, it should definitely be in your side deck. Very, very good. Bell is top of A tier just because of Branded. It hits other things as well, like Labyrinth and Sprite and stuff, but the main reason I think it should be there is just because you're going to hard lose to Expulsion if you don't have some sort of answer to it, and Bell's one of the most consistent answers to Expulsion, so I definitely think you should play it. Then we have Zombie World, which just isn't relevant because Flunder isn't as relevant. Flunder's still strong, but people aren't playing it as much and don't lose to it as hard, so I think Zombie World is not as good as it used to be. Heavenly Dragon Miradora just never came up. It's not relevant. Kurakara, I think, is actually a very, very good card. I'm going to put it at the top of B tier, but you know what? I would say that it could probably sneak into A tier. It's a very, very good side deck card. It does do a lot, and it causes a lot of problems for a lot of players. One of the nice things, well, obviously, is that the fact that it tributes and gives you a big body means you can out so many boards with one Kurakara, which is great. If Kashtira does the full zone lock board, for example, when you get to main phase, they would have used 2 monster effects. You tribute 2 of them, then you beat over another one, and now you've got 3 cards, and you can just play the game as normal, which is great. Spellbound is okay, but I don't think it's worth the cost. That's the biggest problem. Not the cost, but I don't think it's worth the slots. There are better options. Thrust is another S tier side deck card. It's just very, very good. I mean, yeah, Search is anything that you need. So anything that you would want, like a Dark Hole or something, you'll get off Thrust, which is great. Change Apart is also very, very good. Kashtira being the format, and it just hits a lot of decks. It's nice to steal your opponent's monsters. And then lastly, Chaos Hunter. So I don't think Chaos Hunter is bad, but I think the problem with its discard does hold it back, and the fact that it relies on your opponent's special summoning is also bad, which is a bit of an issue. But other than that, I do think Chaos Hunter is pretty good. Conceding Light is okay. I think we stopped seeing this as much because Kashtira now have kind of Forbidden Lance and stuff, which does slow down the versatility of this versus Book of Eclipse. But I do still think Swords of Conceding Light is a good card. It's just that Book of Eclipse is better. So let's say bottom of B tier probably for that. Book of Eclipse itself is going to be A tier. Very good card. Deals with a lot of matchups. It does have a bit of a downside, but still an amazing card. And then lastly, time cards. If you're going to an event, you need to play some sort of time card. It's just the nature of the thing. So yeah, guys, that is my side deck tier list. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll talk to you soon. Peace.